A new report says economic migrants who were chosen by the government to come to Canada are leaving the country in record numbers. The study was commissioned by the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. That's an organization that encourages immigrants to become citizens. Among the report's findings, French-speaking immigrants who came to Quebec in Ontario are more likely to leave Canada than their English-speaking counterparts. The country's biggest cities, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, see high turnover rates of immigrants. The cities serve as hubs where newcomers adjust to life here before moving somewhere else. And those who immigrate to Atlantic provinces are more likely to leave Canada within the first 7 years of arrival. But if they stay longer, they're more likely to remain in Canada for the long haul. We're now joined by Daniel Bernhard, CEO of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, which authored the report, and he joins us from Ottawa. Thanks so much for being here, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
So, do the findings of this report surprise you?
Yes and no. I mean, we published the first edition of this report last year. This year we find, of course, that outward migration has risen to record highs in 2020, which is the last year that we have data for. I can only imagine that this year, once the data are available, the problem will be even worse. But I think what we learned this year is that we have a lot more color and a lot more detail around the data than we had before. And so there were some surprises. For example, the difference in the number of francophones that are departing. 20% of immigrants to Canada will leave in the long term, but among francophones it's 35%. Things like this really did jump out at us, but fortunately these standout points also give us opportunities to intervene and to act. Now that we have more information, we can take more strategic action to reverse the outflow of immigrants who are hand-selected to address some of Canada's biggest concerns. When they leave, we lose. And so this is, I think, hopefully a helpful intervention in that effort.
Any more of the key things that stood out to you the most?
Well, as you mentioned in your setup, economic immigrants are the most likely to leave the country. We also found that temporary foreign workers, who are much maligned these days, actually are among the most likely to stay in the country once they obtain permanent residence, which was an interesting finding. And I think you alluded to this earlier in your setup. Canada is a really diverse country. I don't just mean ethnically, but by region. We have a lot of different circumstances at play, and the retention performance is very, very different across the region. So like you said, in Atlantic Canada, most of the people who leave really, really quickly. They leave from outside the big cities. In Ontario and Quebec, they leave from inside the big cities. So I think this really calls for a diversified approach to retention for different categories of immigrants, for different language groups, and for different regions of the country. It's a complex federation, and we need to approach it with the flexibility, adaptability, and the localized sensibility that can really allow us to combat this problem effectively.
So there's a lot of interesting data points here, but are there any answers to the question of why? Why are we seeing increasing numbers of immigrants leaving the country?
So this study does not talk about why, but another study that the Institute for Canadian Citizenship has done with Ipsos, which is a poll of over 20,000 verified adult immigrants, shows that housing affordability is the main reason driving immigrants from Canada. And of course, this is ironic because immigrants are blamed for Canada's housing affordability crisis. Incorrectly, in my view, but that is the prevailing perspective, even though mistaken right now. I think we're looking at a situation where immigrants to Canada are more and more skilled than ever before. When my parents came, they spoke very little English, they had very little education, the proverbial $5 in their pocket. Today we're taking people with advanced skills and degrees who speak English and French impeccably well and who have global options. And so Canada's immigration posture is based on the idea that immigration is a manifestation of our generosity, that we are just admitting people who are fleeing destitution for a better life. We haven't caught up with the fact that actually we need immigrants more than immigrants need us on balance. And if we are going to lower our rates because we think that this is the answer to some of the homegrown policy problems that we've developed over generations, I think we're up for a rude awakening. If we reduce the number of immigrants, for example, by 10%, we might reduce the number of people in the hospital waiting room by 10%, but we'll reduce the number of people in the hospital staff room by 30 or 40%. And so this is the math that Canada needs to do. It's sensible and fair to talk about how many people are coming and how we select them and all of that. But we need also to take into account the number who are able to stay and contribute their talent and energies to our success in the long term and not leave for another country and contribute to their success.
And if that's your position, that we should be looking at getting more immigrants into the country and that they should be encouraged to stay here, how do you think Canada should go about doing that?
Well, I'm not talking about more or fewer. I'm simply saying that, we have significant objective needs in areas like early childhood education, where a shortage of workers is preventing mothers from getting back into the workforce after having children. There's a daycare where my son actually attends, which has an empty room in it because they can't find a staff member to work in it. And they're actually a unionized place that pays very, very well. In healthcare, we have documented shortages in all kinds of professions. Home construction is another one where we're facing incredible amounts of pending retirement at the time when we need to be ramping up our building. So we can adjust the levels of people coming into the country all we want, but those needs do not disappear. Who are disappearing are actually the immigrants who are hand-selected to fulfill those needs. So we need to take both supply and demand into account and to recognize that, yes, there are opportunities for reform of the system to make it smarter, but we need to make sure that the people who are selected to come here are able to succeed. Opening the door is not enough. And this is not just something for the federal government to pay attention to, provincial governments, but also all of us as employers, as neighbors, as colleagues can provide a welcome experience if people really do have the skills and opportunity to contribute to Canada's success and to address some of our shortcomings and our failings really over a long term. We all have a vested interest in ensuring that they are satisfied here, that they succeed, and that they stay.
It's a big conversation right now. Daniel, thank you so much for speaking with us about it.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for your time.
Daniel Bernhard is the CEO for the Institute of Canadian Citizenship.